Hello and welcome back to Fork in Politics. I'm Kalvin Chapman, your host. What I'm going to discuss today, I hope gets you very angry. If it doesn't get you very angry, please go onto my website and read a little bit more. We're discussing the draft Investigatory Powers Bill that the government has just announced. Now, this bill is intended to correct, I think, some issues in the law that have been disclosed by Edward Snowden's disclosures over the last couple of years. The bill, however, is contained in a 300-page document that has 35 pages of explanatory notes before you even get to the legislation. I think that's done just simply to bore people to death before they get to the legislation, and people don't seem to have read it. This bill, if it becomes law, will affect everything in your life. It gives power to MI5, MI6 and the police, as you would expect and as I would expect, and it would stop them doing things that they're not allowed to do, and that's what I expected this bill to be. The problem is that's not the only thing that this bill does, and that's what should frighten you. Now, it's a weird place to start, but I want to start at the end of the legislation in Schedule 4. Schedule 4 sets out who can request access to your sensitive data. Now, under the Act, the Home Secretary can tell, by giving notice, telecommunications companies and internet providers to keep your data, and they've got to keep it for 1 year. And that, as you would expect, means that MI5, MI6, anti-terrorism, the police, the Serious Fraud Office, all of the agencies that you would expect to look at this data, they get access to it. But what Schedule 4 sets out is all of the agencies that are allowed access to this data. Now, you think your Facebook messages, your Twitter direct messages, your emails, these are all really sensitive personal data that should not be freely given away. So a quick look at Schedule 4 drags up a number of weird points. Why is the NHS named? The NHS is allowed access to your private data. They can look at what you've been doing on Facebook, in Twitter, on your email. The NHS Business Centre, they're entitled to it. Why has the NHS Business Centre been allowed carte blanche to look at my private data? The Scottish Ambulance Service is entitled to ask for your data. Why on earth would the Scottish, but not English or Welsh, ambulance service be allowed to ask for your private data? Can you imagine somebody in the Scottish Ambulance Trust desperately needing to know what you said to somebody else on Facebook last week? Well, under this new bill, if it were to become law, they would be entitled to apply and have access to all of your data. So on my website, which you can see here, in the blog section, and it's called Draft Investigatory Powers Bill, I've set out the weird inclusions on Schedule 4, and Schedule 4 has the Department of Health, the Department of Transport, the National Health Service, Business Services Authority, any NHS Trust, and the Scottish Ambulance Service. I don't understand, and I would be delighted if somebody could put in the comment section below a reason why you think the NHS Business Services Authority, the Department of Transport, or the Scottish Ambulance Service, or indeed why any NHS trust would need access to my Facebook, why they would need access to my emails. It doesn't make sense, and I want somebody to try and explain that one to me. So the next part, I think for me, is the most important section of this bill, and it's something that anybody who has a knowledge of the law or politics and how they work, section 67, I think, is the most important, the most crucial part of this bill, and it's the entire reason this bill should be objected to. Under section 67, the Home Secretary, who at the moment is Theresa May, she may pass regulations, which means she's going to do it. That them including that in the act, in the bill, means she is going to do this. She can pass regulations that devolves the power to agree to the disclosure of all of the information I've just discussed. She can devolve that down to the very people who would be asking for it. Now, as matters stand today, without this bill, if anybody wants access to my data, they've got to ask a judge for it. They've got to ask the Home Secretary for it. If this bill were to become law, I would expect that the only people who could grant access to my emails, my Facebook, my Twitter, and my entire online life, I would expect that they would have to apply to the Home Office, and either a boring Mandarin or the Home Secretary herself or a judge would have to agree it. If section 67 gets enacted and becomes law, she can pass a regulation that would bypass Parliament, that would give these people, so Jim being a director of the Scottish Ambulance Trust, she can give him the power to get my data, and he doesn't need to go to the Home Secretary, he doesn't need to ask a civil servant, and he doesn't have to ask a judge. Why on earth would you want to... This power, the power to look at my private data, is one of the most important freedoms we have. We live in an electronic age where everybody lives online. So it's the same as breaking into my house and putting a video in the corner and a microphone in the other corner. You should only be allowed to do this if you have the highest authority. But section 67 takes that authority away from the Home Secretary and devolves it down to the NHS trust that want access. And what it says in section 47, where it sets out, section 47 sets out the reasons why you can ask for this data, and it says in section 47 subsection 2, it says the person undertaking the investigation shall not be the one that has authority to grant or refuse access to this data. That I agree with, but then it says, but if the designated senior officer considers that there are exceptional circumstances, which mean that subsection 1, which is the investigator should not give himself authority, so circumstances which means that subsection 1 should not apply in a particular case, that subsection does not apply in that case. We know from the Snowden debacle and the things that Edward Snowden's been telling us that there is massive abuse by the security services in the US and in the UK. And what we're being told is the Home Secretary doesn't need to make the decision under section 67. She will devolve it down to the people who need access to this data. But under section 47.1, an investigator should not be allowed to give himself that authority. But subsection 2 says that yeah, go on, you can do it. It doesn't matter so long as you can think up a good enough excuse. Do you not think the security services are not going to step round this legislation by getting somebody else who has the authority under section 67's regulations, and they're going to pressurise somebody? How many times during the Cold War did the security services for any of the sides get somebody in a position of power to do something they shouldn't do simply by blackmailing them. Do you not think to stop them being recorded under Section 47 that they're going to use the powers in Section 47 to force somebody from the Scottish Ambulance Trust or one of the NHS trusts to think up a reason why they should apply for it, and using subsection 2, think up a reason why nobody else should be discussing this? That should terrify you. The fact that I, as an individual, could get access to your data simply because I'm a senior person in one of the Schedule 4 named agencies. And not only could I get access to it, but I could get access to it by making up a reason why I shouldn't ask somebody else, and I use subsection 2 to have that power myself. That should frighten the hell out of you. And if you don't get angry about anything in politics, you should get angry over this. It's outrageous that Theresa May is putting this backdoor trap so that anybody can do what Edward Snowden's been saying they've been doing, and this gives them license to do it. Not only does it give them license, but they can bypass the judges and they can bypass the Home Office, and they can do it themselves with nobody else looking. So you've got to ask, how long are they entitled to have unfettered, unrestricted access to your data?